Hello everyone and welcome to today's video. Today we're talking about the 2026 Georgia Senate race, where another Republican representative, Mike Collins, is reportedly teasing a Georgia Senate bid. The two-term Republican congressman says the Democrat Ossoff must go, as the GOP targets the seat as one of their top flip opportunities in 2026. Republicans are salivating at the chance to flip the seat, and Collins, in a video first obtained by Fox News Digital, contended that Ossoff must go. He said, quote, "It was never in my plans to run for the U.S. Senate. I love what I'm doing now. I think I've been effective for my district, the state. I love my district. I mean, just good, solid, hardworking people," he continued. "But I also understand that sometimes you don't do what you want to do, but what you need to do." Collins, a two-term lawmaker representing Georgia's 10th district, still didn't directly say that he was jumping into the race, and noted that he would first consult with his family and President Donald Trump to determine where we can be best beneficial to help in the mission to make sure we get a Republican in the U.S. Senate from Georgia. The lawmaker became a staple on the road during Trump's campaign last year, and his bill, the Lake and Riley Act, was first signed into law by the president during his second term. Collins argued that Ossoff doesn't represent the Georgia values that I cherish so much, and noted that Republicans have largely dominated the state in recent elections, including Trump's victory in November. Still, Ossoff, who is seeking re-election for a second term, was the first Democrat to win a Senate seat in the Peach State in roughly 2 decades. Devin Cruz, a spokesperson for the Democratic Party of Georgia, said in a statement to Fox News Digital that immediately after voting to rip away health insurance from 750,000 Georgians, Representative Collins now wants Georgians to give him a promotion. Cruz continued, "Collins would just join a crowded, messy primary that will leave the GOP nominee badly bruised, while Senator Ossoff is building massive momentum to take on whichever Donald Trump loyalist limps over the finish line." Senate Republicans now view Ossoff's seat as one of the most viable flip opportunities in the upcoming 2026 midterm cycle, when the GOP hopes to keep and expand upon its thin majority in the upper chamber. Should Collins dive all the way into the race, he will go face-to-face against fellow Georgia Republican Buddy Carter and Georgia Insurance Commissioner John King in the Republican primary. Carter was the first Republican to jump into the contest after Georgia Republican Governor Brian Kemp, who is heavily considered a heavy favorite to run against Ossoff, opted to forgo a Senate bid. Now I'm going to get into more of the other candidates running right here. But this race is going to be very, very close. Obviously, Jon Ossoff won a very close election back in 2020, which I'll also be getting to in just one moment. He won a very close race, and the Republicans are hoping to target this race and flip it back to the Republican side, but that's going to be a lot easier said than done. Ossoff is building quite a formidable war chest for this campaign. As of March 31st, 2025, Jon Ossoff has raised roughly $31.9 million, including having a little bit over $11 million cash on hand. So Ossoff is preparing for a very tough general election. On the Republican side of things, with Brian Kemp not running, the Republicans are scrambling to find a Republican candidate they can unite around to face off against Ossoff. Because if they have a very messy Republican primary, like the article said with the Democratic spokesperson, that actually could hurt the Republican candidates and having to invest all that money, time, and effort into going after each other instead of Jon Ossoff. That gives Ossoff a better chance at winning. That's how electoral politics and primary politics often works. Right now, Reagan Box, a horse trainer, is running in the race, as well as Buddy Carter, U.S. Representative from the 1st District, and John King, Georgia Insurance Commissioner. For the Republicans, Christoph Chapman, Christina Clement, Rick Temple, and Vincent Watkins have all filed paperwork to run, but in all likelihood, given they have very low name recognition, they're probably not going to become the Republican nominee for Senate. State Senator Colton Moore from the 53rd District has formed an exploratory committee to run, and then some big names are still considering running as well, like Rick Allen, U.S. Representative from the 12th District, now Mike Collins, U.S. Representative from the 10th District, Derek Dooley, the former head coach of the Tennessee Volunteers football team, Tyler Harper, Georgia Agriculture Commissioner, and Rich McCormick, U.S. Representative from Georgia's 7th District. A handful of Republicans are also reportedly listed as potential candidates. They have not given an indication if they are leaning one way or the other for this race. Doug Collins, U.S. Secretary of Veteran Affairs and U.S. Representative from the 9th District and candidate for Senate in 2020. Greg Dolezal, state senator. Also should be worth noting, Doug Collins, a very close ally of President Trump. Brian Jack, U.S. Representative from Georgia's 3rd District. Kelly Loeffler, former U.S. Senator from Georgia and Administrator of Small Business Administration in the Trump administration, another very close ally of the president. And Brad Raffensperger, Georgia Secretary of State, certainly not a very close ally of the president, more so close ally of Governor Brian Kemp. Case in point right now, it's very possible Mike Collins could become the Republican nominee for U.S. Senate in Georgia. The Republican primary at this point in time is still very wide open. And if an endorsement is given here by President Trump or Governor Brian Kemp or both in this race, it may pay significant dividends, as this race is certainly very wide open on the Republican side. Right now, the only hypothetical polling that's been done so far was back in April, which included Marjorie Taylor Greene in that poll, but there was one part of the poll where it did not, and that showed that Mike Collins led over the rest of the field, Collins getting 46%, Buddy Carter in second with 23%, Rich McCormick in third with 21%, and then John King in fourth with 11%. Now, in the other poll, which did include Marjorie Taylor Greene, who already ruled out running, so she will not be running in this race, but it did show that in second place, Brad Raffensperger had 22%, Mike Collins then had third place at 15%, Buddy Carter fourth place with 13%, Rich McCormick 5%, John King 2%. So Brad Raffensperger entering this race could play a very significant role as well. But without him in the race and without Marjorie Taylor Greene in this race, this poll showed that Mike Collins had a lead over the rest of the Republican primary field. If he officially enters the race, will that continue or will that change? We'll have to wait and see. But Mike Collins entering this race does represent one of the more, I would say, according to the poll, one of the more potential notable Republicans that could become the nominee. But even still, if Mike Collins were to enter this race, this is going to be a very tough race for the Republicans to win. Inside Elections, Cook Political Report, Saba Crystal Ball all have this race listed as a toss-up. Race to the White House has it listed as lean Democratic. It should also be worth noting that an independent candidate, Albert Al Bartel, a businessman, Air Force veteran, no labels national delegate, and independent candidate for U.S. Senate in 2020, is also in this race. Georgia has a rule where the winning candidate must break 50% of the vote to be declared the winner on election night. If not, the top two vote getters will advance to a runoff election. Usually it's in early January, and then they'll face off in a head-to-head where the winner has to break 50%. So a third-party candidate in this race could play a very important role in setting this race to a runoff if the election is too close. Right now, the only candidates that are officially running for Ossoff versus Buddy Carter and Ossoff versus John King, they're very early polls. All 3 out of the 4 polls and the Ossoff versus King matchups have been Republican-affiliated polls. For Ossoff versus Carter, 4 of them have been Republican-affiliated polls. But in all cases, Jon Ossoff is leading over the Republican candidates in both of these polls. It should be worth noting that there is large amounts of undecided vote in these polls with 9, 12, 13, 23% respectively, but Jon Ossoff, as the incumbent U.S. Senator, has high name recognition and is starting out with the early lead over these polls, and quite frankly, I fully expect him to do so. Though it is interesting that against Buddy Carter, Ossoff's usually around 46, 47%, except for one signal poll where he's at 49%, whereas against King, he's already breaking 50% in 2 polls. It's going to be very tough to beat Ossoff if he's starting off in the high 40s, but if he's starting at 50 or better, the chances of beating him are almost near 0. Now for some other candidates, Jon Ossoff versus Brad Raffensperger seems to be the most competitive in a lot of these recent early polls. That signal poll from Maine showed Ossoff and Raffensperger tied at 44-44, but again in the 3 other polls it showed the same problem for the Republicans, where Ossoff is starting out with a much higher floor, as he's the person that people in Georgia have likely heard of. Trafalgar has Ossoff 46-38, Atlanta Journal 48-39, WPA 46-32. Ossoff and Kemp, no point talking about that as Brian Kemp's not running. Marjorie Taylor Greene, same thing. Ossoff versus Mike Collins. This is shown to be one of the more competitive matchups thus far in this potential matchup here. For that signal poll in May, Ossoff only leads over Collins 46-43%. That is one of the more closer matchups we've seen, 11% of the vote still undecided, and 3.4% margin of error here. So if you look at it in favor of the Republicans, you could say Mike Collins is statistically tied with Jon Ossoff in this race. Now, of course, the margin of error can also go both ways. That could also say Jon Ossoff is not up by 3, he's really up by 6 points, but you can look at it both ways depending on which political side you want to view it on. But case in point being, of these early polls that have been taken, Mike Collins seems to have a higher floor of support than a lot of the other Republican candidates, like Marjorie Taylor Greene and even Brad Raffensperger in some regard. Mike Collins starts out with a higher floor of support. But you could also say the same for Jon Ossoff in these margins, where against Raffensperger, Ossoff had 44%, Trafalgar had 46%, Atlanta Journal he had 48%. Ossoff versus Collins starts out with 46, 48, and 44 from back in January. So Ossoff is going to start out with a high floor of support, really no matter what, around 47, 48, 49%. The question is, can the Republicans put up a candidate strong enough to try and cut into those margins with Ossoff and maybe win a very close election that in all likelihood will probably require a runoff to defeat the Democratic incumbent. Right now it remains to be seen if that will be the case, but in the early polling data, Mike Collins seems to be one of the more stronger Republican polling candidates at this point in time. A big help for the Republicans in this race would be if President Trump and Governor Brian Kemp decide to both endorse a singular candidate. For instance, if they both rallied behind Mike Collins, endorsed him, and essentially tried to clear the primary for Collins, that could go a long way in trying to help this race get a lot more competitive. But this is going to be a close race, really no matter what. We saw Georgia go for President Trump in 2024 by 2.2%, a very, very close race, after Joe Biden won it in 2020 by 0.24%. But the Senate races in 2022, Herschel Walker lost to Raphael Warnock, the Democratic incumbent, by 2.8% in that runoff election. And just to show you in the first round of voting, again, neither Ossoff nor Warnock, neither Warnock or Walker, were able to break 50%. Warnock got 49.44%. Walker got 48.49%. So 2 Senate elections in a row now, neither candidate has broken 50% in the first ballot. So it's possible Ossoff or Collins could, but I would bet it's more likely we see a runoff election in 2026 once again for Georgia. But then they did the runoff, and then we saw Raphael Warnock, get 1.8 million votes or so. Herschel Walker get 1.7. Warnock from the first election to the runoff only lost about 125,000 votes or so, where Walker lost closer to 200,000 votes on that. So voter turnout in the runoff is also a very important factor. Back in 2020, we also saw Warnock win the special election versus Kelly Loeffler by 2.1%. Ossoff also defeated Republican incumbent David Perdue in 2020 to win the Senate seat. And this is very, very interesting because many people may not remember this because it seems so long ago now, but on the first round of voting, David Perdue actually defeated Jon Ossoff. David Perdue got 49.73%. Ossoff only got 47.95%. So from that standpoint, you could look at it saying, well, Ossoff technically lost to Perdue on election night for 2020. But again, Georgia's election laws are very important to note because neither candidate broke 50% of the vote. Third-party candidate likely stopped Perdue from reaching 50%, had to go to a runoff. And this was after everything that was happening with the 2020 election with the state of Georgia. A lot of Republican voters didn't want to get out and vote again. They felt their vote didn't count. Democrats were really energized to get out and vote to give the Democrats a Senate majority, and they did that. Ossoff, from November to the runoff election, lost roughly 100,000 votes. David Perdue, tell me if you heard this before, lost over about 200,000 votes. The Republican turnout in these runoff elections in 2020 and 2022 were not as high as the Democrats, who were very motivated to get out to vote for Ossoff and Warnock in 2020 and for Warnock again in 2022. So for 2026, if the Republicans want to try and win this Senate race, a big thing they're going to have to do is they could try to outright beat Jon Ossoff on November's election day in 2026. But I think it's going to be more likely they would beat him in the runoff because Ossoff, as the Democratic incumbent this time around, Ossoff got almost 48% going up against a Republican incumbent. This time, he's the Democratic incumbent. He's got the Democratic money in the war chest to help him out. Defeating Ossoff without a runoff is going to be very tough for the Republicans. Doable, yes, but very, very tough. So Republicans will likely need a runoff to do so. And all eyes for Georgia are going to be watching on these very important areas right here surrounding Atlanta and Fulton County. These suburban areas, Cobb County, Douglas County, Clayton, Henry, Rockdale, Gwinnett, Forsyth, Cherokee, these are areas that have been shifting a lot to the Democratic direction in recent elections. These are the reasons why Georgia, which was for Mitt Romney in 2012 an 8-point win, went down to Donald Trump in 2016 a 5-point win, and then a Joe Biden 0.24% win in 2020, and only a Trump plus 2.2 in 2024. The surrounding Atlanta metro area has shifted a lot to the Democratic direction, and it's going to be a key area to watch for in 2026 if the Democrats and Jon Ossoff want to hold on to the Senate race, or if the Republicans want to win it back, they need to try and replicate the map that President Trump was able to do in 2024. After my most recent Senate prediction for the state of Georgia, Georgia is one of the 3 Senate races I do have as a toss-up or I have no rating. Right now, at this point in time, I do predict that this election will go to a runoff election, and when everything is said and done, I do think that Jon Ossoff will nearly win this race by more than 1%, but under 5%, rightly around a 2% victory at this time, making it a lean Democratic win at this time. Mike Collins, being the Republican nominee, if he were to enter, does potentially make this race a little bit more competitive, but I do think Jon Ossoff is building up an impressive war chest, and seeing as 2026 is supposed to be a more Democratic-friendly year, I think this gives Ossoff a pretty strong chance at winning re-election and winning this race. But I'm sure to hear what your thoughts are. Leave a comment below. Tell me what you think is going to happen in the Senate race. Do you think Mike Collins will run? And if he does, do you think he'd be a good candidate to face up against Ossoff? Leave your thoughts down below. Thank you so much for watching. Hope to see you in a future video.